But that does seem to be one of the biggest secrets that there are, and I think it's related to the cataclysm. Well, it would be related in the sense that if we, like I said, if it was revealed to us where we live, and then part of that system is like a cyclical, like a clock, I think it's like a clock, just like how we can predict eclipses for thousands of years. This event that I think is happening is something like that can be predicted, and I think some people know exactly when it's coming. Not many, but I bet some know exactly. The farmers probably know exactly when it's coming, and they probably know, like I said, the way Russia's acting compared to the way America's acting, it almost seems like some people know that how it's going to turn out, and how other countries are going to fare, and it's very strange.
This evening, I'm joined by a friend to the Future Forecasting Group, someone who, when he speaks with wisdom, he speaks with humility. He's a truth seeker at heart who shares his knowledge and his wisdom and his experience, where you might have heard him on the REESE report. Greg Reese, welcome to the Future Forecast podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Dennis. Thank you. That was a nice introduction. I appreciate that. Thanks.
I've been thinking about it all day. I'm really happy to have you on here. I've been listening to different interviews that you've been doing. Just today, I listened to your interview with Greg Carlwood on the Higher Side Chats. And really that's what shines through the most for me when I hear you speak. There's people in this field, and when they talk, it's like, oh, you've read a book. You've done, you speak from more of experience. You've really thought about these things. You really analyze these things, and it sounds, you're really just in search of what's the truth, what's going on, which, as you know, is a never ending journey. You find an answer, and then there's how many more questions that come with that answer. How did you end up in this position? How did you end up just searching for truth? Let's start there.
Well, I didn't know it at the time, but I wrote a book about this actually. When I was 5 years old, I was invited to spend the night in a Jesuit house in Toronto. My uncle was graduating as a Jesuit priest, and the family was up in Toronto to see him graduate, and everyone was staying in hotels. And we were having lunch in the commissary, and some of the Jesuits invited me to spend the night in the Jesuit house. What happened that night, I can't say I didn't remember, because I talked about it throughout my entire childhood, but I always referred to it as a dream. And it was a dream that I was obsessed with, and I would talk to my closest friends about it and annoy them about it. And I'd be like, it was the weirdest dream. And I would say it was the weirdest dream because it seemed so real. But basically, you would say, I guess, once it came back to me through meditation, visions, and then some detective work, and then talking to family members, and then actually contacting the priest or one of the Jesuits at the time, so like that. So, but basically the memory was being taken to a basement area. Everyone was wearing robes. There was a young woman who appeared to be naked, laying on an altar. She had a blanket over her, and she was unconscious. And they put a knife in my hand, and they were trying to get me to stick it in this woman. This is the memory. I know it's pretty dark.
Yeah.
It's one of those, I've talked about it. Like I said, I wrote a book about it. So that was the experience. I believe there were some drugs involved, based on like the recollections afterwards and the memories afterwards. For many years, I thought I was crazy, but I definitely knew that the church was lying to me, and I knew that the government was lying to me, and I knew that basically everyone in authority were lying, and they were telling some kind of story, and they were hiding something very strange. And I didn't put that together when I was a kid, that it was because of that experience at all. But I actually became an altar boy at I went to Catholic grade school. I volunteered to become an altar boy because I didn't tell anyone this. I lied and said, I want to serve the church, whatever. But I did it deliberately to wage war against the church. So I would steal money from them, and it wasn't out of greed. I would burn it. I would give it to my friends. I would vandalize. I would destroy things. I would do a lot of nasty things just to try to Looking back, I think I was just trying to get someone's attention, God's attention, some kind of supernatural attention. But anyways, that's what really what sparked it. That's really what did it. And I've been asking the question, not just the question as to like what's really going on, what are they lying about, but also I always had this question in the back of my head, what happened to me? What happened? That was the question that I had. I remember since I was a kid, like what happened? I never said that out loud. That was something I always kept quiet. And then as I got older, I thought maybe I was crazy. And then when I retrieved all this stuff, which would have been when I was 36 years old, what was incredible about that moment was there was this sense of understanding that I'm not crazy and that I don't have mental issues. I mean, I do, but they're as a result of this thing. It wasn't that just because I'm like a reject or something.
Isn't that such a liberating feeling though when you
It
get that
was, yeah,
validation? It's like, because you spend all this time really. I mean, that was how I started. A big part of my journey. Am I crazy? And have to figure this out. That I imagine all these things that have happened, and then you get that validation piece, and you're like, wow, I'm not crazy. And then it's like, whoa, I'm not crazy. This is real.
yeah, yeah. In fact, it's like I don't really apologize for it anymore, but I used to feel bad about it. Like someone would ask and I would tell them the story. It's a dark story and people are usually uncomfortable and that's understandable and everything like that. But I don't feel victimized. I don't feel, like I said, I used to feel crazy. I became very drawn to drugs and sex when I was growing up. And looking back, I understand that now. That was a way of me sort of like finding peace in the present moment, because in that pleasure, I could be totally zoned into the present. And outside of that pleasure, I was lost in my mind, haunted by my past, so that was the only way I was really ever able to find peace, and playing music and making art and stuff like that. But yeah, for me, figuring it all out and putting it together was just like a huge aha moment and like, wow. So, and you know what?
Yeah, and I'm sure.
I'm sorry, I share my stories very openly. I'm a pretty open person. I don't really hide anything. And I've told that story to a lot of people one on one. And I would say at least half the people I've shared that with, more than half, have said that they had a similar experience happen to them. So this cycle of abuse that's happening that is a very common thing here on Earth.
Yeah, it's really it's sad. I work with kids. I'm in education, and I've worked in a variety of different neighborhoods, and you see it. You see the trauma with the kids and the things that they experience, and there seems to be no help for them. Not that I want to go down that rabbit hole with the kids stuff, but just seeing how the system is designed and how children and youth are so overworked and just so poorly trained. When I call them out to support a student who we have suspicions of abuse, I'm talking to these people, and it's like, hey, I try to find out what kind of training they had. Hey, have you been trained, to interview kids? And like, oh yeah, we got 2 weeks of, how to question kids. I'm like, 2 weeks? I mean, you should have a forensic child interviewer talking to these kids. And they just got these kids right out of college, no experience, interviewing the kids, dismissing cases, and the cycle just keeps going on. It's really sad.
Yeah, the system seems like it's built around it. Like
Yeah.
the Catholic Church, which is an experience I am a little familiar with, that was rampant. Openly admitted to be rampant. Nothing has ever happened about it, and they've never done anything to correct it, and nobody really questions it. A lot of people still defend it. Most people, I think, defend it. Most members of the church defend it. And then that's just that, though. But then you get into CPS, and that's a exact same thing. Almost every organized structure in the modern world is not what we think it is, or not what we're told it is. It's a big, some type of trauma factory or slave farm. I have no idea yet. I have no idea.
Yeah, and that's a dark place to. That was my my journey. My a couple books ago was looking at the basically the prison planet idea that we're just a food source for these parasitic, etheric organisms, the archons. They're feeding off our energy and everything. And I think that's a level of it. But I think as you move past that, you start to see this bigger picture start to evolve. Like, okay, that's a part of the game and part of this learning experience that we're going through, but it
That's
doesn't
just
have to
part
be
of
all
the
dark.
environment. Yeah, it's just part
Right.
of that's just Earth,
Right.
and that's
Right.
all the way up and all the way down. Like
Yeah.
I eat meat.
Hmm.
I don't like factory farming. I prefer like grass-raised, grass-fed beef. Uh, but I don't think that's evil. I don't think the farmers hate their cattle. They love them, I'm sure, for many reasons. And whatever's farming us, I don't, from our perspective, I can understand why people think it's evil, but I don't think it's evil. I think, well, first of all, I don't have enough information to make
Yeah.
that decision. I don't really know what's going on. But yeah, that's just Earth. It's like in order to live here, you have to consume life. It's not a, it's a brutal place. It's like it's a meat grinder here, you know?
That was a hard realization for me. It was years ago. I was looking at nature and I was like, oh, I'm gonna just follow nature and I'm gonna be at peace and everything's gonna be beautiful and lovely, And then a couple of things happened. One, I had wasps building a nest in my backyard and I had two dogs, and now I've got this ethical dilemma, right? I've got these wasps here, and I start looking at wasps and their life cycles and how they just will go into a honeybee's nest and like rip their heads off. And I was like, oh, this is awful. This isn't nature. And then I have to kill the wasps, So that was this big dilemma I'm going through. And you look at things like parasitism and it's like, wow, that's a pretty awful death as well. And it's like living with nature isn't always this beautiful, balanced, harmonious. Nature can be very cruel. And
Yeah.
if you believe in a grand design, I mean, that would be by design that this world was built, to enact those kinds of acts, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think, the yin yang is one of my favorite symbols. And it appears to show like energy because it's movement in the yin yang. And I think there's so many different things encapsulated in that symbol. But one of them is that I think that that's the energy that runs this place, this duality, this
Yes.
destruction and love, these two different things. I think some of the most interesting videos on social media, or at least videos that feel like, I don't know, somewhat meaningful, are nature ones, both the ones where you're seeing things like you're talking about, wasps killing bees or birds killing birds, and then other ones where you got like, kittens kissing cows and, goats hanging out with
Right.
dog, I like those better, but they're both striking because that's in both examples. Most of those animals, I think, are living more in harmony with this place than we are. Like we are. Maybe it's just because I'm biased, because I'm living as a human right now. But it seems like the humans are struggling the most with balance when it comes to life.
I agree. I did. It reminds me. I did a remote viewing session about 2 years ago. We were looking at some exoplanet, Earth-sized planet, Kepler 452b, and I ended up picking up information on a civilization. I don't know if this actually exists or if it was my imagination, but the data I got was fascinating, and it showed this grand cycle of things. And so the phase at the top was the lover's cycle, right? And that's the collective in society. Everybody's in love, everything's great. But then they start to quarrel. And then as the quarreling's going, we moved into the destruction phase. And the data points I was getting was, this destruction phase wasn't this angry, I'm going to kill you sadistically. It was an act of mercy because everybody had fallen so far from the love stage that they were just suffering. So it was an act of mercy to just kill everybody and start over, destroy everything and start over. And then there was the rebirth stage. And then they moved back into that lover stage. And it was actually what the data was telling me. It was the lovers stage that threw everything out of balance because they were just so focused on being in love and all the happiness that everything else fell by the wayside. And that led to then the quarrels because they didn't have that
Yeah.
balance of the light and the dark. It was a really fascinating. That's always stuck with me, that session.
It reminds me, this is another bit of a dark story, but I don't have, I don't really, I love animals. We talking about animals, I grew up with dogs. I don't have a dog because I've always moved and live in small places. But I tried smaller pets because of that. And I got a snake when I was in my 20s. I got a boa constrictor snake when I was in my 20s. I think it was like the first real pet I had. And loved it. I would put her on my neck and stuff, and while I play guitar, and it was, enjoyed the warmth of my neck, and it was awesome. Very, like, first week, I put a live rat in a cage, and I read directions. I do read the manual. So I got the book, and the directions said, don't ever leave a live rat in the tank with your snake. And if your snake doesn't eat it right away, take that rat out and try it again later. Don't leave it there without observing. That's all it said. And then so I got up in the morning, I put the rat in, and the snake ignored it, and the rat went right to the corner and like started shaking in fear. And so I was like, this will be fine. So I got up and I went to work. Hours later, I come home from work, and the rat is eating the snake alive. The snake is half dead, if not closer to dead. It's like rat's just eating it like corn on the cob. The rat is no longer scared, and the snake is just out of it, completely out of it. And and it was horrific. And so I killed them both to put them out of their misery and got rid of it and got rid of the whole thing and put it out of sight. And it was very emotional. But it was I think it was my love. It was my love for that snake that blinded me, and I didn't dig deeper. It was also bad instructions because they should have been more clear. But the instructions said don't do that. I went and asked someone at a pet store, and they said, well, you don't do that because a snake will never kill unless it's hungry, which I had no idea. Snakes get a real bad rap for being like evil and Satan and stuff. A snake will not. A snake will sit there and let a rat eat it alive. Just because it's not hungry, it won't eat it. It's or kill it even.
Right. Yeah, it's first of all, that's got to be an awful experience to see that and to go through that. I mean, a big lessons learned there too. But I remember when I was just getting into meditation and I was going through this process of I'd go to this one spot and I'd meditate in the woods and I'd go to another spot. And the first time I tried this, I meditated, I'd set some intentions out there and I go to this other spot and I hear this rustling of the leaves and out comes like this 8 foot black rat snake that I was like, oh, this responded to my meditation. And then I was raised Catholic as well. And I was like, oh my God, I conjured the devil. What have I done? I'm so evil. And then I started doing some reading and I started looking into the Gnostic texts and everything. I was like, oh, the snake is the instructor, delivering wisdom. It's this new journey that I'm on. It was a really cool experience.
Christ on the cross,
And
even I've heard the snake is Christ on the cross. It's what
I haven't
Jordan
heard that
Maxwell.
one.
I think Jordan Maxwell says that, or a lot of the Gnostics will say that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll have to look into that one. I haven't seen that comparison yet. Well, that's because in the garden, according to the Gnostics, the snake, the serpent was that one that was delivering the wisdom and letting mankind know that you're ignorant right now, that you are like the gods, basically liberating their minds. Fascinating. The things that we learn just from observing, and it sounds like you spent a lot of time just observing your environment and asking those questions, and then continuing to dig deeper and deeper. How do you stay sane? How do you stay grounded? Because it's easy to look at this and say the sky is falling. This is awful. This is horrible. Oh my gosh, what do I do? How do you find that sanity?
I don't know. This probably isn't a good answer. I think I was just born for it. I'm totally built for this life that we're in right now. Up until okay, so I lived most of my life kind of like sex, drugs, rock and roll, wild lifestyle, loving life. I've had a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of suicidal moments, but at the same time, I am hungry for experience. I'm hungry to learn new things. I'm extremely curious. There's so many things about this life that I enjoy. I've had many moments of spiritual joyfulness, amidst all the suffering and the pain and everything. But I kind of like expect everything to go to pot all the time, like literally,
Right.
like all the time. I could tell you stories. Many years ago, I fled the country and went to, where was the first place I fled to? I think it was Hawaii was the first place I fled to many years ago because I thought everything was about to go to shit and I needed to get somewhere.
Right.
I did a lot of research. And then years later, I fled to New Zealand. I figured New Zealand was the place to be. And I do it all the time. And it's gotten to the point where it's just a part of me. And I kind of feel, I'm laughing because it's like, one of these days I'll be right. One of these days it is all going to go to pot, I think,
Right. Yeah.
But
Eventually,
it
it's going to
just-
happen.
Yeah, or maybe not. Who knows? But the good news is that people that it's probably, if anyone who, I don't have a lot of good close friends, but those that I do have, they probably don't mind hearing me, say it's all going to go to shit. Because it's almost, for them, it's probably almost like reaffirming, oh, okay, we'll be fine. We'll be fine for a little bit longer.
Yeah, yeah, you have some time, right? But following that call, I think, well, you said a whole bunch of things, and I think first of all, giving that perspective of some of those hard times that you've gone through. You mentioned sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You mentioned having those dark suicidal moments. I mean, I think talking about the yin and yang and the energy too. I think that gives you amazing perspective in looking at this bigger picture, and it gives you a deeper understanding because it sounds like you also. I'm assuming that you meditate just on some of the things that you said. I mean, it sounds like you pay attention to your own mind and how your own mind works and how different experiences impact your mind. Do you think that plays a part in kind of your quest in helping you, navigate this and share the information you share?
Yeah, I do. I tend to assume growing up that if I'm experiencing something, then everyone else is having the same experience. I'm finally kind of starting to strip that notion away and get rid of that. But that's for many years always just been my assumption. But like I always assumed people had like an obsessive inner monologue that was constantly questioning everything. And once I got older and started talking to people, I realized that's not true. I realized a lot of people, most people don't. It seems like most people, and they think, and most people think I'm kind of strange because I do. But yeah, it definitely plays into a part of it. Like I would say it's I used to refer to it as God. I don't use the word God anymore because that seems to be very triggering. I try not to. I guess I don't know how. I still haven't figured out a way to not be triggering about it. But lately, I use the term creator because the thing that I talk to, I was born knowing. I came into this world. My first memories were with this presence, and I always thought of this presence as the source or the creator of everything that exists. So there is no, and the reason I don't use the word God anymore is because I think I've learned that some people worship gods that have like other gods that could oppose them and stuff like that. You know, it's like, and that's way over my head and that's way beyond me. I don't get that at all. Because like I said, the God I pray to is the creator of absolutely everything. And I'm a part of it and we're all fractals of it. And so if you want to know something, that's the thing to go to. And so that's basically been my thing is talking to that thing. And then the way I listen to it is usually through synchronicities or intuition. And I'm getting better at listening to it. For many years, the big struggle was listening to hearing my intuition. I've achieved that through meditation, like you mentioned, listening, like through many practices of decades, really. Like that meditation is not something that I found to be something that comes quickly or easily. It took years for me to get to the point where I felt like I could have some type of control over my mind. But I do think that there's a mental connection to this presence that I'm referring to, the creator. I don't know what that is. Some people, I often wonder if that's what the Holy Spirit is when people talk about the Holy Spirit, because there does seem to be, like, for example, in the Hermetic laws, all is mind, everything is mind. That was the thing that got me hooked into those writings immediately, was because I was like, that makes sense to me. Like the mind is not nothing. It's we could probably compare it to like the cloud. The cloud is like a man-made replication of this thing, maybe, or something similar. But yeah, it's through talking to God, or like I said, I don't use the word God anymore. Talking to the Creator and listening to my thoughts and observing things. Most importantly, I think, is observing things, especially yourself. Like observing how you react to things, and especially emotionally, how you get triggered by things you're, not just that you desire, but things that you have like a strong aversion to. These are, I think, very valuable things to take notice of, because you're not going to just learn about yourself. You're going to learn about all humans, and you're going to learn about Earth, and you're going to learn about this whole weird drama that we're in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's very important to pay that close attention and see, where is this feeling coming from? Why am I having this reaction to it? I also agree with your comparison to the cloud. Everything is mind. And the Holy Spirit being some kind of almost like a communication mechanism. In a lot of the work that I've done, what kept coming up is this electromagnetic field that we're connected to, and how we're transmitting electromagnetically through the heart, and able to perceive time and space, really anywhere in time and space with different forms of meditation and remote viewing, things of that nature. I mean, it's really a fascinating universe that we live in, that may not even be solid physical reality, right? We may all just be some idea, some thought form, some data point out there floating through the cosmos as we're trying to continue to learn and grow as like you said, fractals of a larger mind here, all doing our piece for whatever reason, for whatever end, where that might bring us.
Did you say that you remote viewed the Holy Spirit?
No, I have not remote viewed the Holy Spirit. I feel that the ability to remote view,
I
I think,
understand.
is tied into what some would consider the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Things like Reiki energy. My some of my work was looking at this. Is the first thing I was looking at is psychic communication possible? I mean, obviously, I know that for a fact that it is now, but when I was first learning and doing some research, you start seeing all these different little elements, all these different testimonies of things. And what I kept coming back to was this electromagnetic field. You look at Cleve Baxter's work of primary perception and the plants that are having this communication, and then the heart math studies where, the electromagnetic heart's putting information out there. And even in the Bible, they have comparisons and stories where there's this psychic communication, this psychic healing that's going on, and I suspect that's what the Holy Spirit itself might be. I never really got a good answer when I went through, Catholic school, through my training. I never really got a good answer as to what it was. It didn't really explain to me well enough until I went kind of on my own journey for it.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find any good answers in the official narrative.
It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense with what they give us. Coming back to your own mind though, I mean, your mind, do you know if you're neurodivergent? I mean, just the way your mind works and races and is constantly connecting things. It sounds like a neurodivergent mind.
What does that mean, neurodivergent?
It's ADHD. I mean, so they consider people on the autism spectrum or people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder to be neurodivergent. It's as opposed to neurotypical, which is they say the normal way of people thinking.
I
and
would say I'm
processing.
neurodivergent. Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
that's probably right. I would say if I went to the doctor, I don't trust doctors. I don't go to the doctor. But if I were to go to the doctor, I'm sure they would have, especially these days, diagnosed me some kind of mental disorder or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a great tool. I found it to be a great tool. Maybe I don't even think I've ever even found it to be the source of suffering or pain at all. Really, it's in fact one of my favorite. Like I consider more than anything, I consider myself to be an artist. Then I don't consider myself to be a journal. I mean, I guess technically I've been doing video journalism sort of, but the way I see it, I'm just summarizing stories that I think are very interesting and important for people to look at. And I love to make videos and music as an art form. So I'm just sort of combining all these things together and
And that's
creative.
and that's what I think is the beauty of those minds. I have ADHD, and I work with a lot of students that have it. And when you're in school, you're taught like, oh, ADHD, it's a disorder because you don't think the way everybody else thinks, and you have attention problems and all this stuff. But really, it's not that we can't focus; it's that we're focused on everything, and that we can make these rapid connections between abstract things and bring it all together. And the mind is constantly going, and it's constantly what it's searching for is stimulation, right? Because there's an issue with dopamine and stuff in our brains, so we're constantly searching for those things that stimulate us, and then we find it, we go at it. And unfortunately, some people, it's stifled. It's like, well, I got to do what they're telling me to do in school, and this is boring and this sucks. I'm gonna get a 9 to 5. I'm gonna be depressed. I'm gonna be miserable because I'm not following my intuition. I'm not working within the way my mind operates. But then it sounds like you make your own path. You follow that creativity. You have these different adventures and these experiences, and you just go with it. I think minds like yours are minds that, I'm reminded of Barbara Marciniak's book, Bringers of the Dawn, where she says, there's souls that are here, they're system busters. They can look at something and say, there's something wrong here, and they got to bring about that change, or they got to break down that system, they got to expose things. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've been doing on this journey.
Yeah, I guess so. I think like I said, since I was a toddler, I had I guess you could say like a religious distrust for all organized systems in humanity. And like I said, I declared war against the church when I was a kid.
Right.
So from a very young age, I knew, and I learned how to lie and steal with my parents to get out of trouble. I learned how to lie to get out of trouble with the police when I was a young kid, hide from the police, run from the police. I learned how to dodge the system as a young kid. I also learned the it doesn't feel good to deceive, that I learned that many years ago, bully and stuff like that. But I've always been, and that's probably one of the reasons I've been drawn to art and creativity, is because I knew from a very early age that I was not going to conform to this society, this world that we live in. And I didn't necessarily consciously want to destroy anything or break anything down. I mean, although I've always been like that, and I've always been very destructive, that wasn't necessarily on my, I just wanted to live my life, safely and to have my experience, because I do believe firmly that we're here for a reason. I know I am, and I just want to accomplish whatever that is, get a decent grade, and go on to the next world. But lately, in the past few years, as a result of the popularity of my work, which I did not expect at all, that was a huge surprise to me. Lately, it's been making me rethink these things and rethink that maybe this is part of my purpose here is to, when it comes to like the vaccines, that I know for sure I had an extremely meaningful, purposeful part of that being able to say, I think starting in March of 2020 was the first video I made warning people against the vax. That there is no question, there's no ambiguity about that to me. That was like just a couple of years of absolute clarity of purpose in my life. But other than that, I have no idea. Other than that, I have no idea because I don't exactly know what's going on here. I do think it's important. It's important for me to know, or at least look for the truth. I don't know if you're ever going to know what the truth is. It seems like it's a bit of a trick. There's a great movie. One of my favorite movies is the Christopher Walken stars in it called Communion, by Whitley Strieber.
One of my favorite books. Yeah.
And near the end of it, he's talking to the alien, and he's like, "You're never going to show me who you are. You're never going." It's like a Russian doll. It just keeps it's a lie within a lie within a lie within a lie, and there does seem to be that kind of jokester quality about this place. So
Yeah, yeah, and but what's interesting about that is let's take truth for a moment, and sometimes a truth, even if years later you find out, oh, that wasn't correct, like when I was younger, I believed in Catholicism. That was my truth. That served me, right? It got me to the next level, and then one day I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I had that foundation, and it moved me on. So sometimes, whatever truth we perceive, isn't necessarily the truth or the truth. It's just our truth in that moment that allows us to get to wherever we need to go on this journey.
it's a story. It's a story that we believe in, and it has an effect on our decision making and the way we see things. It becomes like a filter that we see things through. And it's one of my favorite things in the world is to reach a moment where I realize that this thing that I believed in is not real. I find that to be extremely exhilarating. It's like probably like the closest you could feel to like being a newborn child again, like grabbing shiny things, like, what's this? It's like, because if it's not what you thought it was, and that means like, it means you have no idea what's going on, and it's a good feeling. But it all does seem to be story. I definitely don't, in the past 6 years of not just my work, but observing how history is being written falsely in real time. Like if anyone paying attention over the past few years can see that that's happening. And then you got to wonder, is that how it's always written? And there's always the saying, the victor writes whoever wins, the victor writes
History written by the victors. Yeah.
History is written by the victor, but seeing it happen in real time and in the way it was done it was just startling. So I don't believe anything anymore. I was very, very formed, like my personality, a big part of my personality was formed in believing in the American Revolution. There was probably because of this part of me that is very anti the system, anti everything. I'm very anti-authority. That probably was just a fertile bed waiting for the seed of the American Revolution story. Because I remember that really formulated my personality. And I remember as I got older, looking at some of the characters involved and thinking like, it's not all that. It's revolution's great and all that, but and then. I've heard a lot of challenges to that story, that was all contrived, which actually makes sense. It does appear that America was sort of a strong arm of the Roman Empire, controlled through Britain, and with the appearance of being an independent state. And that allows a lot of war crimes to be committed, by Rome that can later be blamed on America or whoever, that's more like what I think's going on. But But I guess I just went on that rant because the idea story, anything you hear, anything you believe, it's really very interesting to me as an artist, especially like, and I love story. I think we all love story. We're almost all obsessed with story, almost I think to an unhealthy degree. Like that's why Hollywood has so much power over us is because we're obsessed with watching people have their stories. We project ourselves onto them. We project our enemies onto the baddies in the film, and it's interesting that we do that. But it's something I think we should. Speaking of being aware of ourselves, that's something I think everyone should be more aware of is how they fall in love with strangers that for some reason, then they trust what they say as if they're your friend. It's strange.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood is the magic of Hollywood. Jordan Maxwell even talked about that. He says the Hollywood, the Druid priests used to make their wand out of the holly tree, and the Hollywood is waving that magic wand, I often suspect that if we have this ability to manifest or to drive events, the media and Hollywood is definitely can be potentially be a part of something like that. If everybody's so focused on this one thing, is that giving it more energy to bring that about, as opposed to what if collectively we could focus on something more peaceful, something more
Yeah.
beneficial to everybody? Would we have a shot that way?
When I was in Russia, I got to live in Russia for 6 months recently. I was there like a year ago. A year ago, I was getting ready to leave, and on many reasons, it was an incredible experience. I really need to sit down and write about it, actually. But one of the things that I observed there is they don't allow. There's a certain type of programming that they don't allow on their television, and it like, for example, like shows where young kids are doing lots of drugs and hurting themselves. And, here in America, we might see that as art. It's a story or it's a drama. And, that's a good argument. I'm an artist, writer, we could have that discussion. But in
Right.
Russia, they see it as unhealthy for their young people watching TV. And if I were to have heard that pre-2020, I probably would have thought that was like bad, totalitarian, well, that's not good. And but having lived through 2020 and seeing that you could actually make people kill themselves just by putting TV, certain programming on the TV, it blew my mind. I was absolutely blown away. And I don't mean to make light of it. I know some people listening we've all lost people throughout the past few
Right.
years. So I don't mean to make light of that, but it blew my mind. It actually changed me. I'm a very different person now than I was pre-2020. But now, post-2020, Greg, I can respect that. I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I love government and government's awesome. I think government is a reflection of our weakness. And until we achieve spiritual enlightenment, the government will always be there to police us because we need it, because we're incapable of doing it ourselves. So I don't think it's something to be excited about or something to be proud of. But I understand why they're doing that, because they care about their kids growing up and they don't want their kid. And post 2020, Greg knows that if a young kid is watching a good looking kid on the TV doing bad things and hurting themselves, some of them, not all of them, but some of them will actually start imitating that.
Yeah, the trends are, I mean, it's self-evident in the trends that you see going on with kids. Just the dumb things like eating the Tide Pods. Remember, they were doing
Yeah.
all these weird things. And I see it in the school, these kids following these trends, and I heard we'll call it a conspiracy theory, probably around 2020. I didn't dive too deep into it, but it logically it makes sense to me, is that China was feeding our population with all that mindless, stupid stuff through things like TikTok, and yet those types of videos are banned in China, and instead they're feeding their kids things that are enlightening for them. They're science based. They have some real value to the intellectual development of the kids. And I look at what our kids are watching, and it's all like, yeah, skibbity toilet, what's up, Rizzler, oh hi, like all these weird things that it's just nonsense. There's so much nonsense out there, which I think has a major effect on kids' psyches.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I've never been to China. I would love to go to China. I've been thinking a lot about China lately. I've been on my dinners every night. I've been learning how to master beef with broccoli. So it's like, and I've never tried that before, like any kind of Asian or Chinese spice. So I'm having fun with that. But that wouldn't surprise me. It does seem, I mean, it is a big place and there's a lot of different regions and stuff. It does seem like majority of the mind control, psychological operations, trauma-based mind control seems to be mostly directed at the West by the West. I don't believe China's doing it. I mean, China was set up by the West, and they've been getting set up by the West over and over. And I don't really understand. They have a history of being very clever themselves, but they're obviously not that clever because they've been played a bit. It seems, who knows? Some people like to think that all world leaders are all in on it and part of the club and they know what's going on. I don't think so. I think most of them are trauma-based MK Ultra, trauma victims. But the reason I think it's happening here in the West, that's a good question. It really is a good question. The best answer, you didn't ask me, but I'm always trying to find, I'm always trying to remind myself that I don't really know, which isn't that hard because it's very easy for me to accept that I don't know, because I don't. But I'm always curious and I'm always asking myself, like, well, what could be? What could be? The only thing that explains everything that's happening to me is that there's some type of cataclysmic event that's going to happen, a geological event. I used to call it a pole shift. That's a triggering word for a lot of people. So I just think a geological event that is going to destroy a lot of life and a lot of infrastructure, a lot of valuable assets that these systems use and run on. And that scenario, in my opinion, explains just about everything that you can bring up that's been happening in the past 20 years. It doesn't seem, if that's true, it doesn't seem to be the same across the world because Russia is not talking about global warming. They're actually saying a pole shift is coming in the very near future. They're going to get more land. They're going to need more people. And this is something that like every Russian, like this is like daytime television talk in Russia. So this is like what they're telling people. I'm not saying it's true, but
Right.
because what it appears like, the dumbing down that you're describing of the dumbing down, all in my opinion, seems to lead to this depopulation thing, this liquidation. If it was a business, if it's a farm, which is, I always use the term farm, then it's like they're liquidating and consolidating and preparing for this event that's going to come and hit them in a way. And this does seem to be, this is what Edgar Casey saw. This is what a lot of you guys saw remote viewing it. This
Even
is
Bob
not,
Monroe had a bunch of stuff on Earth changes in his early days too.
yeah.
Listening to those old
This is a
tapes.
very common. In fact, my research for decades always ended up in cataclysm to the point where, because I like to observe myself and keep myself in check as well. I observed that. I observed that every rabbit hole, every subject I would pick to go down this rabbit hole always ended in cataclysm, and cataclysm would explain it. And so I was like, Greg, are you like, are you mental? Do you want that to happen? Are you obsessed with that? Are you seeing it because you want to see it? So I went through that whole process, and I don't think so. The answer I finally came up with was that the Creator wants you to know that your friend that you've had all your life wants you to know that you're probably going to be alive, or you're at least living in the era of this great shift. And so now I think it's the shift of the ages. That's my guess, and I'm sure I'm wrong, but my guess right now is that every couple thousand years in the great year when the age shifts, it's accompanied by this traumatic physical event as well.
Ben Davidson has a lot of work with suspicious observers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work.
Yeah,
but-
I'm familiar with his work.
Okay, yeah, I mean, he has that whole video series on the cycle of disaster, and he's talking about the pole shift. And I mean, I was fascinated with Ben's work. Not that I know him, but with the work that he was doing years ago, because he predicts earthquakes. And back, 5-10 years ago, nobody could predict an earthquake, and you'd be like, oh, the sun's doing this. It's going to have this impact electromagnetically, Holy Spirit, right? And it's going to cause an earthquake in this location here. And he was right. I mean, he gets, he does this great job of predicting things.
Dutch sense too, Dutch sense. And if you're not familiar with his channel, the government kind of scared him off. He's been back and forth lately, but the government was really messing with him and his wife with their internet and all kinds of stuff. But he's been doing it for 15 years, and he's been predicting earthquakes for 15 years, and he explains how they happen and how you can predict them. He teaches you how to predict them. It's not that complicated. He's shown that most of them are triggered by fracking, and the government doesn't like that, obviously, at all. And when
Yeah.
one happens, he'll be like, "Okay, the next one's going to happen right here," and he's right all the time. And I think that's why there's something about the earthquakes, obviously, that we're being lied to about as well, because the government basically shut him down by through intimidation. He still pops up every now and then, but they actually made a movie demonizing this guy. They've been a lot of it messing with his head kind of thing. It's weird. I think the term flat. Want to talk about triggering words? Flat earther. There's a triggering word. And I don't like that word either, but I don't believe in the heliocentric model anymore. And when I did the research and when I did the math to check the because I like math and I like science. One of my favorite things about science is the principles. And the principles are like, if a model is to be accepted as a model that we use as a scientific model, then it has to work out, has to add up, has to check all the boxes. And the heliocentric model does not at all, not at all. And that was the most mind-blowing experience to me was that this assumption that I had that people are smart. If the heliocentric model didn't add up, someone would have said something, some of the people aren't dumb,
Right.
And what I learned, and because I know that I'm dumb, I learned, I think when I was about 12 years old, I figured out that I'm kind of dumb. And if I'm not really careful, I could do some really dumb things. So I've been adapting and overcoming that my whole life. But I always assumed that I was, at least below average intelligence, to be kind. Now I'm starting to think I'm above average and high up there. And I think it's just none of us are really that impressive when it comes to, we're lovable. I think we're super lovable and funny and clever, and we're capable of surrendering ourselves and allowing God to work through us to create miracles and all kinds of amazing things. But I don't think we're that bright. I can't remember what brought me on that tangent. Just because
We went from flat Earth to
oh
to
yeah,
intelligence.
the flat Earth, the flat Earth. So I don't know why I brought up the flat Earth, but the flat Earth was just one of those experiences. I had a reason for bringing it up, but like I said, I'm kind of dumb myself, and so sometimes this will happen. I'll just completely forget about what I was talking about.
I do the same thing. I get so excited and I go on all these different tangents with things, but thinking about the flat Earth, the very first podcast I did on my platform, I titled it "The Earth is Flat," and I titled it as a question. And there's that one it's like a 6-hour documentary showing all the reasons why the Earth is probably flat, and they show all these anomalies. And I remember, I wanted to keep an open mind with this, and I walked away from that not feeling like that the Earth is completely flat. But what I saw in that was that these people are searching for answers, and they have found things that don't make sense and that don't add up. That could point to any number of things. I don't go to, the Earth is flat, but there is something I think that we're not being told. Some of it feels like the Truman Show, right? And there's
That's
this
why I
whole
brought it up.
facade. Yeah.
That's why I brought it up. Was that I was going to say, I don't know where we are, but I think one of the biggest secrets is they don't want us to know. And it might just because of this cataclysm thing. Like if we knew where we are,
Right.
maybe we would know this cycle of events that's happening or something. I don't know.
Right.
But that's why I brought it up. Is it's like the Truman Show is a great example.
Yeah. Yeah, they really nail it quite well in the Truman Show. I knew a guy when I was a kid. He was a friend of my grandfather's, and he had this theory. And I mean, I was young, but I've always remembered. I was maybe 8 when I heard him talking, and he was talking about the Earth not being what you think it is, and he described it as being concave at the top, almost like a deflated basketball, and we just exist in that center piece of it is where kind of our civilization is, and everything else, like he was saying all the flying saucers and everything is coming from externally. I don't know if that's true or not, but I remember he was telling my father how the government taps his phones and he was getting into trouble with the government. They were trying to shut him down, had all these theories. And it wasn't until I heard the flat earth theory, probably 20, 30 years later, that I was like, wow, that sounds just like that guy whose name I don't even remember was talking about that one night when I was a little kid. So I do suspect that there's a lot more happening than we're aware of at this point in time. For what reason, I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think I mean, I understand when they say flat Earth, they mean the surface of the Earth is flat, which I think is true. That's a true statement, I think. I mean, you can measure that and do that, and there's just so many different ways of doing that to come to that determination. I've seen hours of different subjects showing that the surface of the Earth is flat, but that doesn't mean that's all that means. I mean, I need to see things to know. I have my theories. But that does seem to be one of the biggest secrets that there are, and I think it's related to the cataclysm. Well, it would be related in the sense that if we, like I said, if it was revealed to us where we live, and then part of that system is like a cyclical, like a clock, like I think it's like a clock, just like how we can predict eclipses for thousands of years. This event that I think is happening is something like that can be predicted, and I think some people know exactly when it's coming. Not many, but I bet some know exactly. The farmers probably know exactly when it's coming, and they probably know, like I said, the way Russia's acting compared to the way America's acting, it almost seems like some people know that how it's going to turn out, and how other countries are going to fare, and it's very strange.
Yeah, I have heard those rumors as in terms of America is probably not going to come out on top as we go through these changes. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Now I lost my train of thought on that on that same subject. Maybe we have interference running on us here. But it's curious, what people don't talk about when people don't ask certain questions, people don't dive into certain things. And, a good investigator, a good journalist, and, like yourself, who you see these obvious questions, and yet things are so easily dismissed or so easily laughed at. You look at the work of Graham Hancock and how he pieces this is where I was going with this. He pieces everything together, and he looks at things like the precession of the equinox and these markers in time from these megalithic structures. And he says this is a clock marking when the cataclysm happened and when society reemerged. And is that what we, if we are a species with amnesia, as he says, is that what the missing piece here? And if so, why aren't they telling us? I mean, that's a big question, right? Why don't they want us to know that this happens cyclically, and so then we could prepare for it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I guess that's the real big question too, because um, I remember the question I always used to ask when I was younger was like Henry Ford created a hemp car made out of hemp, made out of wheat and hemp. You can see a film of him with a sledgehammer smashing the back windshield in the middle of the winter, and it's bouncing right off, and there's no scratches. So he's making this clear plexiglass windows out of hemp. Hemp fuel, had hemp stations all over the country. Hemp is an incredible crop that can grow very quickly, and he was making cars and fuel out of all this. And then within just a few years, the Rockefellers somehow convinced him to go with oil, to scrap all the hemp and go with oil. And if the Rockefellers, now this is a young man asking the question, if the older Greg thinks the Rockefellers are just playing their job and they're pawns and they're agents of the game. Right. But my question was, if they would have went with hemp, they could have cornered the hemp market. They could have been known for the hemp market and been like the hemp billionaires. And then they would have been folk heroes. It wouldn't have been like the stories of, because oil, the whole scarcity of it, which I don't think is true, and all this stuff. So what I think, that's a really good question, and that's one of the big questions I ask all the time. And I tend to think that there's a purpose for it. It's either seasonal, like the Kali Yuga, where it's predictable that everything is upside down. I've studied a lot of yoga traditions, and in like ancient yoga sages, there are ancient documents, or maybe not ancient, but centuries old, where there are old swamis saying that you'll know you're in the peak of the Kali Yuga when people are breeding for purposes of consumption. And I remember when I probably read that like 15 years ago, and I thought, whoa, that's pretty crazy. It's pretty dark. But really, that's kind of what's happening right now. I mean, you could argue there's a lot of situations. No, in fact, that is happening right now in some instances. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a seasonal thing. And maybe we are heading into a golden age. I tend to think it's more of a seasonal thing. What that is, I don't know. Like astrology is real. I don't know what it is, but it seems to be a part of this place that we live. It makes more sense when you bring everything closer, like with the heliocentric model, which I said will fall apart once you start applying, actual science and math to it. It does appear as if the sun and the planets are closer, a lot closer than we're told. And if that's the case, it really makes more sense when you factor in the ether, which is probably real. The fact that there is no such thing as nothing. This nothingness air. There is something. There's a quality there. There is something there. There is an essence there. They used to call it ether. And these planetary objects that are far away, you know, the closer they get to you, especially when you bring them a lot closer than we're told they are, actually makes a lot of sense how they would affect us. And so I think that there is something going on, and everything's been upside down predictably because it's the season. It's like season of the vulture or season of the vampire or season of the parasite or whatever. It's ugly. But it does appear astrologically as well that we're headed towards better days. I don't know how great we're going to see them, but it does seem like this Earth realm is heading in that direction.
I do think once we're through this transition, if someone from the outside was to come to our society and look at it, be like, man, this place is pretty great. But I think for people like us who are going through this transition, it feels pretty difficult, pretty challenging because the change is hard, and we're watching things that we know and that we trust. We're watching those things fall apart, be dismantled. Everything, media, medical, government, religion, it's all being dismantled in front of us right now. And I think for guys like us, we've like you said earlier, you like when you have that moment of like, oh, that's not what I thought it was. We've been through that. But I remember the first time I went through something like that, it was like, where do I stand? Like my whole world just dropped out and everything's a lie, and I had nothing to grab onto. Eventually, you develop that muscle memory, and you're like, okay, I know this routine. I'm going to learn new stuff now, and it's hard, but it's going to be an adventure as I go through it. But I think we're just watching all of this fall apart right now. My bigger question is, because I agree with you, there's a lot to astrology. What does that tell us about our existence? And the bigger question in terms of like fate versus free will, is there some kind of programming that's happening here that's just playing out like a game, like a cycle?
That's a great question.
Like, thank you. Is that our intended purpose? Are we supposed to break the cycle? What's the bigger picture here with that?
I had the main reason I enjoy astrology. Usually I go to it regularly as a information source. Was in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s, something like that. I was living somewhere, and some people I knew said, you got to go see this girl. She's incredible. She'll take trade. I lived most of my life kind of a starving artist, so I had like a TV I traded for a natal birth chart reading. I've never had a natal birth chart reading before. For those that don't know, you need to know the time of birth and the location of your birth as well as the day. And it's like a snapshot of how the stars were, where you were born, as if your soul pops up and looks, right there. And I've had them done since, and I can see why people raved about her, because she was just looking at I think it was called an ephemeris. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong, but it's like an almanac of the stars. And in one book could have like over 100 years, because there's no words, there's just symbols and dates. So she's like flipping every page. Has just got the dates of each day of the year, and then the symbols of how the planets were. And if you understand how to read the symbols, it's like a Martian language apparently, because she was just skimming through this thing, starting from my birth, and occasionally stopping and being like, from March of 1983 to blah blah blah, and she would nail every meaningful event that ever happened in my life. She didn't miss a single one. And my jaw was on the floor, and I was just, it was as if the feeling I got was, like you said, as if you're born and you have this ticket for the ride, ticket to ride. And you could actually look at your ticket, if you were clever enough, and see, okay, this is in 5 years, I got this, in 7 years, like if I was a parent, I've never had kids, but if I had kids, it would be tempting to have their natal birth chart read, but I would not want to, because it's like, you would know when bad shit's going to happen to them, And, but then the question comes after I had that experience, well, what is free will then? What is free will? And that's a question I've had a lot before. I think my answer is, we have the free will to go with the flow or to resist. We have the free will to trust the plan,
Right.
trust the creator, which I do. I don't trust the man-made plan, but I do trust the creator's plan, and go with the flow and fall back, eyes closed. A lot of people claim they have faith, and yet they seem to know exactly what's going to happen. And I would argue that that's not faith at all. I would argue
No.
faith is having no friggin' idea what's going to happen, and
Right. And just trusting.
and trusting. Yeah. So I think that's what
Hmm.
we have the free will to do. And I think it's very much worth it to do that. I think it's very much worth it to learn to relax and get into it and go with the flow,
I
become
go,
part of the
yeah.
flow, you know?
I go through cycles of that in my life, of just, you know what, I'm just going to accept what happens and I'm just going to ride the wave and, you know, the peaks and the valleys. And then there's other times where I'm like, nah, forget that, man. I'm going to charge hard. I'm going to fight it. And, you know, so it's weird because my attitude shifts continually as I'm going through things and I'm learning things because it's like, all right, I can't control anything. And then it's like, but I don't want to just be some victim of a larger plan that I don't have a say in. But then I struggle with things like, you know, as remote viewers, we look into the future. We pull back data on the future. You know, I don't do it as well as the rest of the team does it. But I occasionally will do viewings for myself and looking into my own life, and I see things that are happening. You know, and then you have that question, you know, it's like the Matrix question, right? Would this thing have happened if I didn't look at it? Or if I'm looking at it, can I change it? If I change it, would I have seen it in my remote viewing session? You know, and what are the consequences of that? So that's the kind of thing that really messes with my mind, the fact that we can see the future. And it seems like some things are a probability of happening, but other things, they seem pretty set, pretty certain. And I just don't know where to go with that sometimes.
Yeah. I think, I think, the remote viewing shows that, the future is a weird thing to remote view. I've done some remote viewing myself, and I
Mm,
think the future is not well. It's the future, right? It hasn't crystallized yet,
mm,
and I think that there's some truth to what the occultists say that the astral realm, the bardo, is the next higher dimension up from here, and that's where a lot of this is coming from. A lot of the information that is crystallizing in this physical realm that we're in is being generated and created from this higher realm and other realms
mhm,
above. There's even books. I think it's Dion Fortune talks about. It's like 100 years ago. She was like a witch in Britain. She would
mhm.
go into the astral realm to do battle against the dark forces. That's what she would do. Like that was her job, you know.
Mm,
And so I think maybe it gets to a point once it crystallizes enough, there's no stopping it. But up until
mhm.
that point, I would imagine there is flexibility and we can affect change. Like I've done it in my own life. That's another question I have too. Like how much can I do it? Like a lot
Yeah,
of times I fall back to thinking that I can only manifest the things that are in line with my purpose here on
right.
Earth. And if they're not in line with my purpose, I'm just going to might as well beat my head with a hammer. I'm not going to manifest it. But if they are in line with it, yes, you can find shortcuts and special tools and golden nuggets waiting
Yeah.
for you along the way of this weird Truman Show. You know?
I agree. You know, I've done some magic work, and when you get it right, and then that thing you're trying to bring into the to creation or into reality appears on your doorstep, that's a pretty powerful feeling. You know, to recognize, wow, this is real. There's something to
Yeah.
this. I can go elsewhere and call something into existence, you know, for myself. I mean, there's guidelines and rules and boundaries with all of that, but it speaks to I think a larger mechanism that, you know, I know for me, I barely can grasp, and I know how to access it, you know, sometimes. But it seems that some of these other people in different positions of power may have a different vantage and a little bit more understanding of just how to use this.
Sometimes I wonder if there is like because a lot of the when I've done it, I exerted a lot of attention and focus in the process, and an
Hmm.
emotion generated
Hmm.
senses of gratitude, of joy, of completion, of already having the thing, kind of,
Hmm.
And I can't say for sure, but from my experience, it seems like that was a part of it. That concentrated focus and effort was a
Yeah.
part of it. on an individual basis. And so it would make sense that if you could change the realm to a certain degree, that movie, the Dream movie comes to mind. I can't think of the name where they're going into
What
dreams
dreams
and
may
just,
come?
they're going into dreams and they're making dreams
Inception.
change. Yeah,
Yeah.
Inception.
Hmm.
That comes to mind. So if you're going to do something like that and actually change the realm, then I think you would need focused collective thought and emotions from, collective, like the
Right.
masses. And
Hmm.
so that kind of makes sense. And so that, and then you notice, well, that is what the media is doing. The media is, to some degree, controlling what people are focusing on and what their emotions they're having. And so I often wonder maybe if there is something to that. If the dark magicians, or let's just call them magicians to be fair. Like I said, I don't have enough
Right.
information. If the
Right.
magicians running this world are doing that, if they're using our thoughts and our emotions collectively to somehow steer the reality of the realm, I have no idea. I don't think so. I think they're riding along the waves as along with the rest of us. I think well, those in power obviously have a different vantage point and
Yeah.
different experience, but
But I also wonder, like I know someone who is a writer for one of the big um, brands in Hollywood, and just like this person is not an occultist, they're not evil, they're not orchestrating these things, and their movies aren't that either. But I think as someone who's creative, sometimes we just reach out and we're tapping into I feel like I'm pulling stuff out as a write when I'm writing a book, the story's there and it's very similar to being in a remote viewing session. It's like I'm just pulling the data out of this story that's there and telling the story that's there. So I sometimes wonder if it's just there's maybe it's a non-human intelligence. Maybe it's the big AI cloud that we're in, right? That's like, okay, tell this story and now disseminate it out to all the nodes so then they get their programming from it. Again, I'm just throwing random ideas out here, but the way that I've seen the creativity process work, I think people are tapping into something greater than themselves as they're
yeah, I
pulling these
agree.
stories out. Yeah.
I agree, but I don't think it's the AI. Maybe I just don't like that.
No,
I
that's
don't
fine.
I don't like that. I know exactly what you're talking about. I have a process of doing it. I do it all the time. It's one of my favorite things to
Hmm.
do, whether it's with a
Yeah.
guitar or a bass or a pen or a computer. And it almost feels like there's an actual birth and a creation happening in those moments.
Hmm.
That is not necessarily like I'm not responsible for, but I am accessing it. It's almost as if I am playing a part with the creator and this realm
Hmm.
in bringing to fruition this new thing.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things. It's probably my favorite thing to do. I think
Yeah.
it's probably, I would argue it's everyone's favorite thing to do. People might not agree, but I think if you were to boil the conversation down, you would find that everyone's favorite thing to do is create something.
I was just going to say the same thing. I think we're one of our purposes here is to create in whatever form that may be. I think there's something magical in every sense of the word in the process of creation, whether you're creating a story, whether you're creating a song, creating a life. I think we're pulling something, and I think that's a divine or a spiritual experience for us when we're tapping into this. That's such a fulfilling moment to bring something from thought, from the ether, from elsewhere, and bring it here into physical reality.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're here for. I know that's what I'm here for. And, like I said, I tend to assume that if it's, if it's for me, then everyone's in the same. And I try not to do that. But it does seem to be what the farmers seem to be engaged in that as well. They're creating
Hmm.
something. Everyone here is creating something. This is
Right.
all about a creation. I think that in this process of us creating things, we're being created. Something better than human is being created in that process. I think we're like in the chrysalis, right? We're
Hmm.
in the chrysalis right now, and it can be sticky and brutal. It can also be pretty fun and exciting, but there is a purpose for it, I believe. I don't believe I'm very open-minded, and I do have dear friends that subscribe to the idea that we're in a prison planet and or like we're stuck in some type of trap. I just don't feel that. I don't think
Yeah.
it's because it's unappealing to me. I'm okay with the darkness. I'm totally okay with that. I just don't, just doesn't, I feel very strongly that I'm here for a purpose. And that's in fact the most important thing in life for me is to achieve that. Like I've had moments, as I know we all have, where death seems to be the greatest thing in the world. Like
Hmm.
uh, the fantasies of suicide have been there for me throughout my entire life to get me through hard times. And just, I don't think I'll ever do it because I want to achieve my goal. But the thought of
Hmm.
it that brings peace. I could just end it all. But what keeps me from doing it, and no matter how bad things get, is I just do not want to fail. I
Right.
really honestly do think that we're all, I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is. So, here's an example. Like I tend to think that maybe the people that are out there parasiting off of other people, I think maybe some of them are just lesser evolved souls who don't understand the spiritual nature of why it's not a good idea to parasite of other people. And they're learning it right now. That's how they're learning it. They're learning through
Right.
going through the process. And we're
Hmm.
all learning through going through things and having experiences. And
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's hard to really demonize somebody, and I say this, this was something I struggled with as a police officer. You look at somebody commits a crime and it's easy to be like, oh, you're a bad person, you committed a crime. But then you look into like their background, their history, their reasoning, like what they've been through, the trauma that they've been through, the hardship that they've been through. And it's like they're on a journey right now and they're making choices that aren't the best choices for them right now. But there's also a lot of hard lessons that are being learned for this person, whether it's in this life or the next life. But they're going through it. We've all had those dark nights of the soul. And for some people, it lasts what seems like a lifetime for them,
yeah,
or for others, and I think having the courage, and maybe it was Paul Rademacher and Whitley Strieber wrote about this too. And I think it was in his second book. I don't know if it was, I think it was called Transformation. He would go out and he would stand in the woods, in the dark woods, for as long as he could, challenging the visitors. And in the beginning, he just kept running back into his house because he was so afraid, until he learned to be comfortable with that fear. And that always stuck with me. I've had those dark nights of the soul, and I've been afraid, and I've run away, and then but I always come back, and I stand there until I'm comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling and that fear. And when you can face that fear and actually release that fear, the experience changes for you. So the same thing can happen, but it now has different meaning, different value, different lessons to be learned from it. I think that's a fascinating way to grow from these experiences.
yeah, I agree. I'm about to try to face one of those myself. Actually, that's what I got lost in thinking about this. I had a few UFO experiences, and the third
Mm,
one, all of the UFO experiences I had a flavor to them where it felt like there was a connection. It felt like they were completely aware of my thoughts, my
mhm.
location, and where I was looking. So the third time I said, okay, well, then I'm going to call them. I'm going to summon them if that, since they're listening and they're always watching. So I was living by Lake Erie at the time, and I would get up every morning at 4:30 to go meditate on the rocks,
Mhm.
looking out into the Black Lake. And on the third day, right where I was looking in the middle of nothingness, like a little pin, it started off as like a pinpoint of light, and I got bigger and bigger and started getting multicolored. It was coming right at me.
Mhm.
And then I started, it was almost like I observed myself do this. Like I observed myself acting like a monkey. Like I started bouncing up and down on the rocks where I was sitting, slapping the rocks with my hands and
Mhm.
laughing almost like like a monkey. And then as soon as I started doing that, it stopped and then it reversed and it went back and to the pinpoint of light and
Yeah.
disappeared and stuff like that. And I didn't like to admit it at first, but I think I was afraid. I was
Mhm.
afraid. That's what it was. And I was acting out of fear, like in a primal sense.
Yeah.
And it sensed that and it went away. And the fact that it reacted to the way it did, kind of like there was still a fear of the unknown, but it
Right.
was not a fear of feeling like this was a negative force
Right.
almost. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it
Just
had enough
something new and
respect and
different.
understanding of me to be like, oh, okay, cool. You're monkey man. We're gonna
I
split.
I went through something very similar. I waited. Communion sat on my bookshelf my whole life as a kid. My mom read it, and I would always stare at that face. I was terrified of it. We had experiences in our home, growing up my whole life. Finally, I was in my 20s, and I was like, I read the book, and that book horrified me. It was so terrifying for me, but I was going into this, and I decided, you know what? I'm drawing a line in the sand because I was trying to figure out, is this a good experience? Is this a bad experience? What does this mean for me? And is this something I need to just, because I went through stages where it was like, I'm just going to submit to it and just allow myself to go to sleep. And other stages like, I'm going to resist this every chance I get. So I finally decided nobody's giving me answers. Nobody's showing up here. I was a soldier. I was a cop. I'm drawing a line in the sand and I'm going to treat this like the enemy. So I conditioned myself to not think because I was thinking, oh, mind control, right? I'm just not going to think and I'm just going to react. The second I perceive anything, out of bed, guns in the hand, I'm clearing the house. So I start going through this process. It was only for about a week, and then experiences started to intensify and things started showing up. And it came to a head when I just remember I was there and seeing the face is what always terrified me. And my head starts coming up like this, and I'm looking at the feet, the legs, the chest, and it was like, "You're gonna see my face," and then the fear just took over. I said, "No," and then that was it. And that happened twice. Where the second time I saw the faces, and I freaked the hell out. Um, but I remember it was a gradual process of how much can you handle as you're going through this, and then once that happened, I stopped going through and like trying to clear my house, and things got a lot easier for me with those experiences. But it was so gradual when you look at it, from that standpoint. And since then, I've had some positive experiences, but it's intense. It can be very intense for sure.
Yeah, I love stories like that.
Yeah, they're few and far between sometimes, but in this community, I think we find them a lot.
Yeah.
Um, we've covered quite a bit, Greg. Anything else that you want to touch on, or any final thoughts that you have before we wrap it up here?
No, not really. I appreciate everyone here at FFG in the group. I was kind of recruited by you guys when I was leaving InfoWars, and it's been a nice place to be to sort of sort things out. It's been a struggle for me because I went from a very naive person who believed that we were going to be able to like live in a Bob Marley song. Before 2020, I really thought that the world would unite and stand up against the dragon, and we would like have this incredible experience where maybe we could defeat the farmers and we could like sing songs about it for 1,000 years, something like that. And then I realized after living through 2020, realizing firsthand the true nature of the situation here on Earth with the human flock. Um, it's been very sobering, and it was difficult. I
Yeah.
struggled for a few months, feeling like defeat. Feeling defeat, and but also feeling like a refreshing, I guess, sense of what's the word? Humility, maybe for even thinking so big. I'm a big dreamer. I really am.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing. It really is.
It's good for certain. It's good. It's very good for certain things. It's very good in my own personal life, creatively for as it creating things creatively. But projecting it out onto the external world that was a lesson to learn. A big lesson I learned, I guess, is that you don't want to do that again. You don't want to project yourself out into the world around you. Or at least if you do, you don't want to do it in a sense of expectation. That's always a big mistake is having any expectation. But so yeah, it's a nice group of people that seem to have a good, clear sense of at least knowing where we're not and what's not going on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
being open-minded enough to sort of navigate through it and everything like that. So it's been good. It almost feels, well, it definitely feels like it was meant to be. Like it was my creator friend looking out for me. A nice spot to transition in this adventure.
Well, wonderful. I'm so glad that you're a part of the crew. You and I don't connect professionally on through future forecasting too often, but I do look forward to future ventures for sure. And you always have an open spot here on the podcast. You have something you want to come on and talk about. Is there anything that you want to plug in terms of, your own work and your own stuff that people can find you?
Just my Substack. Right now, it's all at Substack. If you go to Substack, I'm not exactly sure the URL, but search Greg Reese or the Reese Report on Substack. You should find it. If you go to reesereport.com, it has a link to the Substack and all my video channels. But right now, that's about it.
Okay, wonderful. And I'll have a link up in this podcast. And for anybody that's new to the Future Forecasting Group, you can see the work that the team does using remote viewing to look at a lot of everything and more that we've talked about tonight, looking at world events. This company started looking at cryptocurrencies, and they were remote viewing these cryptocurrencies, trying to describe what a cryptocurrency was. And they've developed this whole method of remote viewing to describe not only the cryptocurrency, how the coin's going to do, but the company behind it, the intentions behind it, and where things are going, which gave us a bigger understanding of like the greater infrastructure that the world is creating right now that we're stepping into, which has so many other societal implications. And then we have fun looking at all those mystery targets, and that's the work that I do. I'm on the rabbit hole team now, so we go and we look at all these. What we call woo targets. I was on Mars a few months ago. That one really sticks with me right now. We're getting ready to drop another big project. This weekend we're meeting as a team to go over our data. So a lot of fun stuff out there. So for those that are new to this channel, you can check us out at futureforecastinggroup.com. Greg, it's been a real pleasure. I thank you for coming on the show. And so on behalf of Greg and on behalf of the Future Forecasting Group, I'm Dennis Nappy II. Thanks for watching.